Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great to see you. And amazing to hear you sing. Amazing. I was ruined at the front. Made me think of the Christmas choir and I started crying. No, that's not true. It was so amazing to hear you all sing. Amazing to be here. And to be able to carry on this sermon series that Mark and Lois started last week. What a great title, Renewing the Land. And the title before us this morning is the Terroir Matters. And so we come at this subject from a slightly different perspective, which, as we unpack this parable that Gerald just read to us, the parable of the sower. I would say the most simple parable that Jesus teaches. Almost, I said to the 9 o'clock service, it's almost like an entry-level parable, if you will. That's not to say it's easy. In fact, the message that Jesus presents us with is the absolute opposite of easy, if we allow it to challenge us. But complicated it is not, because, as we just heard, Jesus presents this parable, and then later on, as part of his explanation to his disciples as to why he's teaching parabolically, he unpacks literally this parable. So even an absolute idiot could preach on this passage. No, don't be doing the jokes yourself, thank you. So you're going to draw what conclusion you will that Andy gave this passage to me this morning. But because Jesus has done all the work for us, all we need to do is to come honestly before the Word of God with open hearts and to allow the living, breathing Word of God to affect us, to infect us, to adjust us, to reorientate us if that's what's required. We just need to be honest before this text. I've had a bad arm for a little while now. It's not surprising. I'm a 50-year-old professional drummer, so there's going to be some wear and tear, and I've played a lot of cricket in my life, so that's not great. And I was trying to play cricket this summer, and my arm was in real trouble. So I went to see a physio, assuming that it was a recurrence of a tennis elbow injury I'd previously had, and it took this physio less than 4 minutes to determine that that was not the issue and that something more significant was going on. So I spoke to a friend at work in the orchestra, a professional viola player, who I know had a career-threatening injury. And she'd gone to a rather brilliant upper limb orthopedic surgeon who literally saved her career. And she gave me this guy's contact details. And a couple of days after that, I was speaking to another friend who I play cricket with. He's actually a heart surgeon, but significantly, his wife is an anaesthetist. And so they obviously would literally see these surgeons in action. And so when I asked her who I should go and see, she said unequivocally, it's this guy. Well, it was the same person. It was the same surgeon. I thought, brilliant. And I was telling another friend about that coincidence, and he used to be a professional cricketer. And he said, well, that's amazing, because I went to see this guy, and he literally gave me 2 years extra on my career because of his brilliance. Well, it's incredible, right? So here I am, in need of healing, and it's pretty obvious where I should go to for healing. Even I can connect the dots, okay? So I make the call, and I arrange an appointment with this orthopedic surgeon. Now, can you imagine when the day came, if I had have entered his consulting room and then decided not to be honest with him? So, he would push and prod. Does this hurt? No. Does it hurt if I squeeze? No. If I do this? No, fine. Can you imagine anything more ridiculous? Of course, I wouldn't do that. Of course, I wouldn't. In fact, it took him precious little time to determine, by skillfully maneuvering my arm, what wasn't the problem and what probably was the problem and the course of action we should take. So I recognize my need for healing. I recognize the healer. I'm honest with the healer. I'm on the process of being healed, right? And you say, okay, Matt, you're overstating this point now. It's pretty obvious, too obvious for words. Who on earth would recognize their need for healing and then not be honest with the healer? Because, of course, no one's done that in their spiritual life, have they? I mean, if you're a Christian for long enough, everybody has done that at some point. You know some stuff's not right. You know there's some stuff going on. Maybe you're not doing something you should be doing. Maybe you are doing something that you shouldn't be doing. And the one person you don't speak to about it is the one person you should be speaking to about it. And then what happens once you stop speaking to him about that? The conversation gets even more awkward, and you stop speaking to him at all, right? And then when eventually you're honest with the healer, the healing process can start. We need to be honest. I was speaking to a great Christian friend a couple of weeks ago, and I was so moved what he was telling me about his spiritual journey during lockdown. And this conversation reminded me of 3 other conversations I'd had over the last several months with so the 4 different Christians in 4 different churches about their spiritual journey. And each of them used the same single word to describe themselves at the end of this hideous process we've all been through, this period. And he said, I've just become a consumer when it comes to my spiritual journey. Now, online services, online worship's been difficult, right? But apart from listening to Mark, he's been great. But it's become more and more tedious as this has got longer and longer. And so understandably, people have kind of hunted around for better worship, more entertaining preaching from celebrity preachers. And the next thing you know, it's about kind of being entertained and almost amused. And we've been disconnected from our church family and our small groups, and even our prayer triplets have struggled to meaningfully connect. And as he was talking, it resonated with me because I thought about myself, if I'm honest, during this horrible period. I've been more worried about myself than my soul, I think. And it's not the same. This world does not want you to be worried about your soul. It wants you to be worried about yourself. This world proposes that when you think about how your life is going, how you measure that, the only thing that matters is my outer world, for want of a better phrase. It's a world of reputation and appearance. It consists of how much I have and what people think of me. It is visible, it's obvious, it's easy to keep score in the outer world. You can check how I'm doing by what I have, where I live, how my career's going, my lifestyle. And this world tells you that improving the circumstances in your outer world is surely going to make you happy on the inside. And friends, that is rubbish. Not only is it rubbish, spiritually, it's a potentially fatal lie. There was a Christian writer called Dallas Willard. Some of you will know his work. Tragically, he died a few years ago, but not before he had become a massive blessing to the church. A fantastic legacy of his writing and teaching. And this is what Dallas Willard says about you. He says that you are an unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe. It's the most important thing you need to know about you. Let me repeat that over you. You are an unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe. And when it comes to thinking about success, Dallas Willard says, the most important thing about you is not what you get, what you have. It's the person you become. That's the stuff you can take into eternity. I mean, this world wants you to think about yourself, not your soul, but the most important thing about you is your soul. Your soul is not just something that becomes important when your physical body dies. Right now, the most important thing in your life is your soul. It's who you are. That's why the devil is desperate to sustain this fallacy and distract you spiritually. And so here, it's killing people today. It's a spiritual killer, that spiritual distraction of focusing on the self and not the soul. And clearly, it was a problem 2,000 years ago because this guy called Jesus of Nazareth, at the peak of his popularity, early one morning, sees a massive crowd, gets in a little boat, pulls out onto the lake so everyone can hear him, and he teaches them, as he teaches them these kingdom parables, he starts with a story about their soul. And he speaks to this little farming community with an analogy that they understand very well. He says there's this sower who sows seeds. Now, it's not a story about a sower. It's not a good or a bad sower. The sower is perfectly consistent, right? He's equally lavish and generous with the seeds on a variety of different surfaces and soils. It's actually not even a story about seeds. It's not good or bad seeds. The seeds are perfectly consistent. And given half a chance, the seeds want to take root in the soil. And the seeds are intended to represent God's plan and his heart and his desire and his action to redeem our souls. It's when we get to the soil that this story becomes interesting. Here's where the variables are. And for soil, in accordance with Jesus' unpacking of this parable, read soul. And his message is simple. The closed soul means death. The receptive soul means life. And Jesus doesn't dress the message up beyond that. The first seeds land on this path. That's the hardened soul. And they just bounce off and the birds eat them. The thing about the path that I want you to remember is for us in 21st century Paul, we think of a path on this concrete pavement, but this path was exactly the same material as the good soil, right? It was just soil that had been trodden on and pressed and crushed down and stomped on and walked over and hardened. And that coupled with the Middle Eastern climate that baked it in the daylight, you have this very hard exterior. But just underneath this hard exterior is perfectly good, fertile soil. Why is it hard? I don't know. Hurt? Rejection? Failure? Isolation? Fear? Fear of things not working out? Fear of the change that a relationship with Jesus Christ might require of you? But the interesting thing is, all of us now can imagine a path, concrete tarmac path. If you can't, just come to my house and you'll see a path with more weeds than tarmac. The seed just needs the smallest crack to penetrate and take root and flourish. Some of you are praying for hardened souls in your family, aren't you? Loved ones, friends, work colleagues. Will you keep praying, friends? Because the hardened soul has no idea how vulnerable it is and how close to being saved it is. Jesus moves on from the hardened soul. He talks about the shallow soul. When he talks about seeds that land on ground that appears to be good, but there's almost no depth to it. And so they do take root, the seeds, and flourish, but without any decent foundation and roots. Obviously, the weather that scorches it and then saturates it, and the seeds just die. Okay, so it's the same result as the hardened ground. Just takes longer to get there. Richard Foster, a great Christian writer, says that superficiality is the curse of our age. The desperate need for the soul is not for intelligence, it's not for talent, it's not even excitement, just depth. We're so clever in this age, we can measure almost anything. No one's come up with a measurement for the depth of the human soul, have they? You've heard me talk before about the challenge, the dangers of having just an emotional faith. It's what I call a felt theology. When we come to Christ, it's an emotional transaction. But if you then don't establish foundations and good roots, it stays an emotional, felt theology. All you're able to do is relate to God in terms of how you feel. And how you feel, for the most part, in this great church family is wonderful. And your job's going well, your family's great, your church is great. You feel great about God. And then the unthinkable happens. Something like a pandemic. Well, we can't meet each other for 16 months. And you're disconnected and isolated. And then the unthinkable happens and our friends and our loved ones literally die because of this wretched virus. And people are ruined financially and professionally and devastated emotionally. And all you can do is wonder where God is, because all you can do is relate to him in terms of how you feel. And how you feel at that moment is that he's some theistic being up there, out there, somewhere, not doing anything about COVID. So you walk away from a God who lets you down. You don't have to become some brilliant biblical scholar, but you do have to put meat on the bones. You do have to be able to relate to God in terms of what you know and have understood and accepted to be reality. Isn't it tragic how close the shallow soul, the shallow soul is to being saved? Jesus continues with the shortest description of the most difficult part of this parable, as he talks about the cluttered soul. Some seed falls on the ground, which appears to be great, and it seems to be fertile, and it's not hard, and the seeds take root, and they start to flourish, and then the weeds come. There's no space for this seed to flourish, and it's choked, and the same result, it dies. And I was saying earlier, what worries me about the scattered soul is preachers, people like me, we start to walk on eggshells when we come near this. We're worried about not offending brilliant, professional, busy Christian people. In case we tell them they're too busy being successful. But listen, let me cut to the chase. You're too busy if the main thing isn't the main thing in your life. I remember an old preacher, as I was growing up, used to say, if the devil can't cause you to sin, he will at least cause you to be too busy and distract you that way. And as we come back to normality, whatever normality looks like and however long it takes, I have absolutely no right to try and complicate the message that Jesus presents and unpacks. But I desperately want you to be honest this morning as you stand before this parable and allow it to challenge you. And ask yourself where you're at. Your soul is fit for purpose. But here's the truth. The human soul requires softness. It requires depth. It requires space. Friends, there is a sower this morning sowing seeds in your life. The question is, where are the seeds landing? Amen.